Man, it feels good to actually be back and recording a video for tomorrow. This past week and a half, I have been gone. So I do thank you guys very much for bearing with all the pre-recorded stuff. I know it kind of can get a little monotonous and maybe seem a little out of date because holy cow, guys, Ruby decided to show up while I was gone. What just happened? Well, it's not Wednesday, but I'm going to come back one day early with our meta breakdown, and I have on the screen right now where the spreadsheet stood before these last 2 weekends of events. This is when I left. This is what it looked like, and we're going to go over the most recent 2 weeks, wins, and what that updated list looks like. You can click down below if you would like to just get right on into that spreadsheet and ignore all the mumbo jumbo talking, all that good stuff. And if you want to come back tomorrow, I'm going to have that breakdown where we take Ruby Amethyst, the deck everyone is talking about, and break down the core cards of the deck, the tech cards of the deck, the most commonly played cards in these tops, including first and second place at the CCQ. Did not see that coming. And then trying to put together an optimal, if you will, list, or is it already optimized? We'll find all that out tomorrow. So we are back at it again. This is where the format stood when I left 2 weeks ago, and well, it was purple steel format. We had some blue steel in there, we had some Baja Blast in there, and that was our tier 1. Well, maybe the tier 1 didn't shake up a ton, maybe it didn't change overwhelmingly over the last 2 weeks. This is just the last 2 weeks total. This is not the compound total of the format. We'll get to that in a little bit. So in the last 2 weeks, Purple Steel Tempo, well, it actually is performing even better. It took up 49. I realize my cropping is terrible on this. Not sure exactly how I did that. Anyway, Purple Steel Tempo taking up 49 spots, other words 37%, and like we just saw, they were at 31, so it actually went up 6% over the last 2 weeks. Blue-green Baja Blast taking up 13% at 17. Ruby Amethyst, though, was the third most topping deck in the last 2 weeks with 16 tops taking up 12% of our chart. And Blurple rounding out our 4 tier 1 decks, 15 tops at 11%. But don't look away because Blue Steel, Chroma Dogs, and Brainiac or Moshamblin, the Amethyst Emerald, I know that they're two very different decks, style strategies are all right there as strong tier 2 contenders. And then the other category making up 4 tops. And guess which deck did it? Red Blue got its first top of set 10. So that's actually really awesome. And I will say there is some missing information in some of these bigger events. The spreadsheet we'll get to in a little bit will break down what counts for a top, and some of the top 16s, top 32s, stuff like that have not been, I guess, shown at this moment in time. As I get that information, I will continue to update the spreadsheet. When I get total top breakdowns, I don't like to just throw it in there because I want to wait until I see exactly where everyone goes, but I know which decks are already accounted for. So that means we're ready to talk about wins. Which decks are actually winning these past couple weeks? Because this is just the tops. So overall with the tops, this to me actually looks pretty healthy. Yes, there's one big deck in the room, and there's no, you have steel removal and purple consistency, and they just mesh together so well. There's no surprise there. The deck can do toolbox into just about anything. But then when you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other decks all within 6% of each other right there, like there's realistically 7 insanely viable decks right now in the current game, and I think that puts this format in a fantastic spot for anyone who's looking for a good game. Now when we go ahead, at least this one I cropped it, right? When we look at which decks are winning these events, little to no surprise, Purple Steel still at number 1, but it's at about 27%. Blurple was at 20% with 3, Blue-Green, Ruby Amethyst, and Chroma Dogs each came in with 2 respective wins. Blue Steel and Amber Steel Aggro, one of those other strategies, each checking off wins. So what counts as a top? If you see over here just above my image, anything with 10 to 20 players is top 2. There actually wasn't too many of those. There was a lot of 40 plus person events, including multiple over 200. So we have a lot of really good information put into all of this. 231 total tops through the month of November. For the month of December, I am going to start a new tab, start it from scratch, because, well, like I said, these last 2 weeks, we saw a huge shift in the meta, and I want it to be more accurate and up to date. There'll be a running format total tab I'll do, but we're also going to do the month of December, so that way we can see which way the decks are trending, which way is the meta trending, and if you stick around a little bit longer, I'll give you some thoughts on what I think that you maybe should look out for a little bit as the format continues to develop out. So anyone, again, all this information is readily available. You can click the link down below, get yourself right on into the spreadsheet. We see that, well, Purple Steel is still the #1 deck in November with 34%, 79 out of the 231 tops. Baja Blast coming in at #2 with 13%. Blue Steel holding on to #3 with 12. Blurple moves into that final month tally of being a tier 1 deck at 10%. Again, this is the entire month running total, but we just talked about how Ruby Amethyst is, the 3rd best deck over the last 2 weeks. However, it does launch all the way up to 8% for the month, which puts it as a strong tier 2 deck. But that's a little bit misleading, and that's why I think as we see the first week into December, it'll show a better representation of where the current meta is at. Then we also have like the Dogs deck at 9%. We see Circle Dogs in there as one of the other strategies. If you look over here too, you can see now the tier 2 decks like Brainiac, Churnadogs, Ruby Amethyst, Circle. And again, this is for the entire month. So this is why I break it up every like 3 to 4 weeks. Because like Ruby Amethyst is a tier 1 deck right now. There's no one can argue that the results are there. It's the 3rd best deck in the format over the last 2 weeks. It's been gaining steam. It's doing really well. Maybe people figure it out and start to counter it a little harder. Maybe the format shifts and changes a little bit more, which that's, I guess, what I'm going to talk about now. There is a matchup tab down here, but I'm actually going to go ahead and delete it. So if you wonder where it goes, it is gone because I'm going to update it. There will be one again within a week or so here. I want to get accurate information for you guys with the way the meta is shifting. I like to update that little chart down there periodically. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the old one, and we'll come back with a new one. So, and then we also have the color combination breakdowns if anyone's curious. Amethyst running away with 61% of tops are playing Amethyst, and when Amethyst is like the majority of the card draw in the format, it's probably going to be the most played color. So moving into December, which deck, if I had to put one at #1, I'm going to be really just mind-blowing here. I'm going to say Purple Steel. It's still so consistent, still has such great removal, such a good toolbox. I have to put it as the #1 deck. That doesn't mean you have to play it, though. We see that right here on the screen. While it does have 9 wins, a deck like Baja Blast has 5, Blue Steel had 4, Blurple had 4, Dogs has 4, Ruby Amethyst has 2 in the last 2 weeks compared to Purple Steel's 4 only in the last 2 weeks. So there's a lot of decks that can compete right now and play out really nicely. Any of these 8 decks in the top 2 tiers are very viable, and that doesn't mean other decks can't compete either. But I'm going to say that Purple Steel by the end of December, which decks do, or let's even go shorter, over the next 2 weeks, what decks do I think are going to be in tier 1 in the next 2 weeks? I'm going to say Purple Steel at #1. I'm going to be a little bit of a homer here, and I'm going to say Blurple at #2. I think Blurple's going to see a little bit of a resurgence with like Ruby Amethyst and some other decks kind of coming back. I think that helps and bodes well for Blurple as well as the Baja Blast strategies. It almost seems like Baja Blast was going away, but it did have an insanely strong showing at the 1 CCQ. And I do want to say too, was it Hong Kong, the best of 1 event? I don't have any of those tops considered into this because it was a best of 1 tournament. That is completely different. Playing best of 1 is not the same as best of 3. I think it would skew the data as far as which decks are where tiered. If we want a separate spreadsheet, if there's going to be more best of 1 tournaments, I'm more than happy to include a tab in here for best of 1, but I don't want to include best of 1 into the best of 3 format because I think it's going to just skew the data and then give us inaccurate results. But I got Purple Steel as tier 1, Blurple as tier 1. With Blurple being there, do I think Baja Blast holds on? I'm not quite sure that it does. And even Ruby Amethyst, I know it's hot right now, but in 2 weeks, will Ruby Amethyst still be in that tier 1? I'm going to say yeah. I think Ruby Amethyst, so it's going to tone back a little bit and be like right at that 10-11% threshold, and maybe fall to 9% and be just below tier 1. Baja Blast probably stays there, especially if Blurple's going to start doing better. That's just naturally going to help Baja Blast do better. So I know, super crazy. I'm picking the decks that are already there to stay there. Purple Steel, Blue Green, and Purple Blue, I think, are just the 3 best decks still. And I say best loosely because, again, there's matchups and so much can come into play. Like, just because overall I think it's the best deck doesn't mean I'd say, well, go take Blue Green to your event, go take Blurple to your event. I would ask you what your local meta looks like, what decks people play, what decks are you comfortable with, which have you played in the past, what's your play style. There's a lot more that I would put into it than that, because as far as being the best deck, I like with set championships coming up in January, big thing that I ask for is being the best deck of the format does not mean that it's the best deck for your local meta. It does not mean that it's the best deck for that day, for that event. Sometimes there's things that come into play. Or do you know people are going to be trying to counter it, so then you get ahead of them and play something else? And sometimes you're completely wrong and it doesn't work at all. The example I like to use is during set 9 when I figured everyone would be on Blurple because I thought Purple Steel was in a good spot. I thought everyone would be on Blurple, and I'm like, you know what? I think Purple Steel is going to fall off. A lot of those players are going to be on Blurple instead, and I'm going to take Turnidogs to the event. And one player was on Purple Steel. 9 of them were on Blurple. I ended up playing 6 Blurple in my 8 rounds on my way to first place. So it was. Do I think that Turnidogs is the best deck? Absolutely not. For that event, absolutely. It was the best choice that could have been made. And I think that that's a big thing to distinguish when you're looking at which decks to play for an event. But Blue Steel, I guess I'll just go down the list. I know I jumped all over the place. This way I don't forget one. Baja Blast, I think it's going to be a pretty decent tier 1 deck still. Blue Steel, I think, is going to continue to regress a little bit. We've seen it in the last 2 weeks. Not playing bad whatsoever, but overall for the format, it's tier 1. I think it's going to regress into just a solid tier 2 deck. I think people played around with it. I think it kind of got figured out. I think people found that there's better ways to do similar things with other decks, but don't sleep on Blue Steel. Like, Blue Steel is 1, insanely fun, 2, insanely strong still, and the top end of this deck can just blow out other strategies once you start playing things like your Horsemans and your Vincenzos, and there's so many good cards in this deck. Don't sleep on it whatsoever, but I do have to put it as a tier 2 deck. Purple Steel, like I said, Purple Steel is just that deck right now. It was Blurple last format. This format, it's Purple Steel. And that's just kind of how formats go. A deck decides to be that deck, and then we all have to go and figure out what we're going to do to beat that deck. Like I said, Blurple, I think Blurple sticks as a strong tier 1 deck. Brainiac, this deck I would argue might push into tier 1. I know that maybe is a hot take, but it's at 9% overall. We saw it at 9% in the last 2 weeks. It's been right there knocking at the door. Brainiac is a deck that I would not be surprised to see moving up even more into that tier 1 category. Amber Steel Aggro, it's a good rogue deck if you're looking for a quick one. Circle, that's another strong rogue deck. Turnidogs, if you're going to play aggro, Turnidogs is the way to go. Okay, that's maybe isn't the best way to say it. Your RA matchup isn't great. Your Purple Steel matchup isn't great. So maybe we start to see Amber Steel aggro be a little bit more viable because of the way the format's shifting. And not saying it's going to even move into tier 2, but maybe I shouldn't just dismiss it as quickly as I initially did. Maybe that's the right call for an aggro deck into the current format. Maybe it's Amber Steel aggro. Who knows? We'll see. But Chromadogs, sorry. I think it's a mid-tier 2 deck. I think it's going to, kind of like Blue Steel, regress a little bit further just because where the format's at and everything. But again, that doesn't mean, like, if you go and hit the right format, people are on, you hit a blue-green where they're still cutting under the sea. If you go and hit a heavy Blurple meta, like this deck can pop off. I'm not going to pretend like it can't. This deck is absolutely great still. Anything in tier 2 can win an event any day of the week. 200 people, doesn't matter. Any tier 2 deck can win those events. Ruby Amethyst. like I said, I think this deck's going to be the fourth best deck of the format, whether it officially sticks in the tier 1 or if it falls down to tier 2. I think that's kind of the question where we're at. I think Baja, Purple Seal, Blurp are all going to do better. And then you have Ruby Amethyst right there, and then Brainiac right below it, where I think Brainiac's ceiling is a bit higher, but I think more people are gravitating towards Ruby Amethyst, and it's kind of like the toy you want to play with right now. Emerald Steel, I know a couple good players who really like this deck still. It's a good rogue deck. That's about where it's at. And Ruby Steel, it's a deck that I absolutely love playing right now too. But I've even said in those videos, I don't think it's above rogue. I just think that it's a very strong deck and people sleep on it. But it's not this tier 2 powerhouse. It's not this tier 1 deck. It's not a deck you expect to take down these major events. Set championships, absolutely. But anything more than that, I probably wouldn't bank on it. Thank you guys for watching, though. I appreciate it. And like I said, we're going to break down Ruby Amethyst in great detail for tomorrow if you want to come back for that, and then work on some other stuff for you guys throughout the week and into next week. But thank you guys for watching. It feels good to be back, and take care.